May 16, 1943, RAF Scampton, Lincolnshire, England. The sun has barely slipped below the horizon, leaving a blood-orange smear fading into a cold blue dusk. The air tastes of cut grass, engine oil, and cigarette smoke. Along the perimeter track, a line of black-painted Lancaster bombers waits like crouched beasts. Their Merlin engines rumble at idle, each vibration rolling across the tarmac and through the chests of the men standing nearby. Inside the cockpit of one of them, AJG Wing Commander Guy Gibson leans forward, eyes fixed on the dim glow of his instrument panel. His gloved fingers drum once on the throttle. He's calm, or he's pretending to be. Behind him, the crew settles into their stations. Navigator, bomb aimer, wireless operator, flight engineer, gunners. 7 men packed into a narrow steel fuselage, each rehearsing the same thought. Tonight, we fly lower than we've ever flown. And we carry something the world has never seen. Out on the runway, ground crews make their final checks. A new kind of weapon hangs beneath each bomber, a steel cylinder, smooth, innocuous, not much larger than an oil drum. Except this one can skip across water like a stone. It's been bolted into a cradle wired to a motor that will spin it backwards at 500 RPM. The crews step away from it cautiously, almost reverently. The weapon is untested in combat. Only a few trials, a few splashes in remote reservoirs, and now the fate of an entire operation rests on its ability to behave exactly as one man calculated. That man, Barnes Wallis, stands among the shadows near the hangar, cap in hand, watching the bombers with a kind of nervous awe. He is no soldier. He's an engineer with thin spectacles and a tendency to worry over every decimal. Yet his idea, dismissed at first as madness, has brought all this into motion. The Germans built immense concrete dams to power their factories in the Ruhr Valley, and they protected them from torpedoes with thick nets. A conventional attack was suicide. Wallis proposed something different, a bomb that wouldn't dive but skip. Something that would dance over the nets, hit the dam's face, sink, and then explode with surgical precision. The commanders had listened, eventually. And now, on this cool May evening, Wallis watches his idea carried toward the runway by some of the most skilled pilots the RAF can assemble. A flare rises green, it's time. Gibson pulls his oxygen mask into place. "All crew," he says into the intercom, voice steady despite the weight pressing on his shoulders, "this is it. Look alive." The Lancaster shudders as he releases the brakes. The engines roar, sharp and animalistic, tearing through the quiet of the base. The runway lights streak past. The bomber gathers speed, 50 knots, then 70, then 90. The wind hammers the fuselage. The ground crew becomes a blur. At 110 knots, Gibson gently pulls back the control column. The aircraft lifts. The wheels leave the earth. The bomber tilts upward into the darkening sky, followed quickly by the rest of 617 Squadron, the hand-picked team assembled specifically for this mission. The crews know the plan. They will fly across the North Sea at wavetop height to evade radar. They will then cross into enemy territory, weaving between hills, power lines, and flak towers. They will stay low, dangerously low, because anonymity is their only shield. And finally, at the end of this gauntlet, they'll make a precision approach on massive stone walls rising hundreds of feet from the valley floor. They will do all this in darkness, under fire, with a single chance to release a weapon that must hit the water at exactly 60 feet of altitude and exactly 240 miles per hour. As the coastline falls away behind them, the Black Sea stretches ahead like an endless void. Moonlight catches the white caps of the waves. The Lancasters drop lower, 50 feet 30, until the blur of water rushes just beneath their bellies. If you were on board, you'd feel your stomach tighten. Every dip of turbulence threatens to slam the aircraft into the waves. But Gibson holds steady, eyes forward, jaw set. Somewhere behind him, Barnes Wallis remains on the ground, staring after the disappearing shapes, consumed by a single hope. That the math holds, that the engineering holds, and that the crews, these impossibly young men, return home after carrying his invention into history. The mission has begun. The North Sea wind claws at the Lancaster's fuselage as AJG thunders just above the waves, so low that each swell flashes silver in the belly spotlight before vanishing beneath the aircraft's shadow. Inside the cockpit, the constant hiss of slipstream mixes with the metallic vibration of 4 Merlin engines pushing against the night. Gibson glances at his altimeter, 50 feet, too high. He nudges the control column forward, easing the bomber lower still until the ocean becomes an indistinct smear racing underneath. Every man aboard feels the danger in his bones. At this altitude, the sea is a razor's edge waiting to slice the aircraft apart, One mistake, one downdraft, and the crew will have time for exactly one thought before they die. Behind Gibson, the navigator spreads his chart beneath a red lamp. "Course good," he mutters into the intercom. "Low cloud ahead, but we're on track for the Dutch coast." Hours earlier, these same men had eaten eggs, smoked their last cigarettes, and tried to make light jokes that no one found funny. Now, as they skim across the black water, the reality settles in. This is a one-way corridor of risk, and the enemy doesn't even know they're coming yet. The Dutch coastline begins as a faint smudge on the horizon. Then, slowly, darkness gives way to faint points of light, farmhouses, roads, the distant glow of towns under blackout regulations. But the Germans are not blind. Radar stations dot the coastline. Coastal guns wait for any silhouette that betrays its height. Crossing the coast now, the navigator announces. The Lancaster slips over the sand dunes at barely more than treetop level. Trees whip past the wingtips. Farm roofs blur beneath them. In the rear turret, the gunner shifts uncomfortably, scanning for German night fighters. Nothing yet, just the thrum of engines and the rhythmic tremble in the bomber's frame. Another Lancaster draws parallel off Gibson's port side, close enough that its running lights blink through the darkness like fireflies. The crews don't speak to each other directly, but they can feel the shared pulse, the simultaneous awareness that the worst is still ahead. "Power lines," the bomb aimer warns from the nose. Gibson sees them at the last second, a lattice of black wires stretching across a canal. He pulls back sharply. The Lancaster rises too sharply, engines screaming for a moment as the heavy spinning bomb beneath the fuselage drags against the maneuver. The aircraft just clears the wires before settling low again, almost skimming the canal water. "Close one," the flight engineer mutters, voice thin. But there is no time to dwell. The Ruhr Valley lies hundreds of miles ahead, and the night is thickening with danger. Minutes stretch into miles. The Lancasters speed across Holland at a blistering pace. They pass windmills, darkened towns, and clusters of marshy fields that glimmer in the moonlight. Occasionally, a startled farmer looks up as an enormous, black-painted bomber rushes overhead with the roar of a passing storm. Then the first burst of flak lights the sky. Small-caliber guns from a German outpost open fire, tracers arcing upward in thin red threads. Gibson yanks the Lancaster sideways. The gunners brace themselves, fingers on triggers, but the attack is brief. The aircraft blitzes through the danger zone too quickly for the Germans to adjust. "Everyone all right?" Gibson asks. A chorus of yeses, a few shaky but alive. The Dutch countryside falls away, replaced by rising terrain. Hills loom ahead, dark, jagged shapes. This is the point where most pilots would gain altitude, but not tonight. The orders are clear: stay low, stay hidden, and trust your instincts. Gibson tightens his grip on the control column. The Lancaster banks hard to avoid a ridge. Another hill appears out of the darkness far too quickly. Gibson reacts instinctively, nose up, throttle forward. The bomber climbs just enough to clear the crest. As they pass over the peak, the valley beyond drops suddenly and the aircraft plunges downward again, engines howling. The crew feels the drop in their stomachs like a sudden fall down a staircase, but they stay focused. They have trained for this: weeks of night flights, low-level passes, and precision drills with the unfamiliar spinning bomb. Still, nothing in training matches the real thing. Ahead, the Rhine River glints under the moon. The German heartland begins beyond it, so does the gauntlet of defenses. Back at Scampton, Barnes Wallis watches the empty runway and wonders whether his invention will change the war or kill the men who trusted it. Above Holland, the Lancasters roar on. The Rhine flashes beneath the Lancaster like a strip of molten silver, then disappears behind them as Gibson pushes the bomber deeper into Germany. The hills rise higher here, steeper, more unpredictable. The moonlight that had once been a blessing now becomes a menace, lighting the aircraft for any German observer with sharp enough eyes. Inside the cockpit, the tension ratchets tighter. Your breath would fog the inside of your mask. Every vibration of the engines, every flicker on the instrument panel seems amplified. The crew speaks in clipped, precise bursts, no wasted words. Ahead, tracer fire erupts again, brighter this time, thrown upward by a cluster of German flak batteries guarding a railway junction. The guns hammer blindly into the sky, their operators unaware of exactly where the Lancasters are but guessing close enough to be dangerous. Gibson keeps the bomber low, so low the gunners can't dip their barrels far enough to track him. The tracers snap overhead like red-hot wasps, exploding in starbursts that illuminate the underbellies of the aircraft for a few terrible seconds. "Steady, steady," the flight engineer whispers mostly to himself. Another Lancaster from the formation turns sharply to avoid a column of flak stepping across the sky like a curtain of fire. For a moment, Gibson sees its wingtips glint. Then the bomber slips behind a ridge, disappearing back into the night. The closer they get to the Ruhr, the more flak they encounter. German spotlights sweep back and forth across the valleys, searching for bombers at normal altitude thousands of feet up. The operators have no idea that 617 Squadron is slipping beneath them like shadows. The trick works until the first spotlight dips lower. A pale beam unexpectedly slices across the treetops, grazing the tail of a Lancaster flying behind Gibson. The crew swears into their microphones as the beam chases them, creeping along the fuselage like a predator's claw. "Break, break," their pilot shouts. The bomber yaws violently. The spotlight lunges after it, followed by a burst of flak from a small-caliber battery hidden on a hillside. The shells detonate in a ragged pattern, sparks flaring against the dark. For a moment it looks like the bomber won't escape. Then it drops dangerously, recklessly, just skimming the top of a forest canopy until the spotlight loses them entirely. The intercom crackles, "We're all right, still with you." But the voice is shaken. Ahead, the terrain shifts again. The coal dark expanse of the Ruhr Valley stretches outward, dotted with factories, smelters, refineries, and power plants. Even under blackout, the region hums with industrial energy. This is the beating heart of Germany's war machine. And rising from its center is the first target, the Möhne Dam. The navigation lights are off, only the moon guides them. Gibson checks his map, then the bomb aimer's notes. The Möhne Lake glimmers faintly between the hills, a massive reservoir held back by a 40-meter-high wall of stone. From a distance, the dam is almost beautiful, a sweeping curve of concrete that holds back millions of tons of water. But tonight, it is a fortress. The Germans have lined the area with anti-aircraft guns, torpedo nets spider across the water, searchlights prowl the sky. But none of it matters if the bomb doesn't sink straight against the dam face. That requires precision flying of the kind no one has ever tested in combat. As they drop lower, the lake's surface becomes visible, still, dark, and waiting. Gibson begins his attack run not from altitude but from barely 60 feet above the lake. Inside the bomber, the bomb aimer switches on two small spotlights mounted beneath the aircraft. One shines forward, one backward. When the two beams intersect on the water at exactly the same point, the bomber is at the perfect height for release. "Lower," the bomb aimer says. "Lower, hold it there, hold it." Gibson locks the altitude. The engines thrum with strained precision. But the Germans have noticed. Lines of tracer fire erupt from the shoreline. Searchlights swoop in from different directions, converging on the bomber like white fingers reaching for a kill. "Here we go," Gibson says. His voice is calm, but every man on board feels the surge of adrenaline. This is the moment they've spent months preparing for, the moment that would either justify Barnes Wallis's invention or doom the mission entirely. The bomb aimer leans forward. "Steady, steady." The spinning bomb beneath the aircraft whirs, vibrating through the fuselage. The lake races beneath them. The dam looms ahead, an immense wall of stone that seems to fill the entire horizon. "Stand by." Tracer fire arcs past the nose, so close it leaves streaks of light across the crew's retinas. "Stand by, stand by." The dam grows larger, closer, impossibly close. "Bomb away." The cylindrical bomb, spinning backward at 500 revolutions per minute, drops cleanly from the Lancaster's cradle. For a heartbeat, the crew sees it fall in free air, lit faintly by the moon, then it hits the lake with a thunderous splash. But instead of sinking, it skips. Just as Barnes Wallis calculated, the drum-shaped weapon bounds across the water like a massive, metallic skipping stone. One skip, 2, 3, each impact sending white spray exploding upward. It leaps over the torpedo nets, its spin pulling it forward until it smashes against the base of the Möhne dam. Then it sinks. Inside the Lancaster, the bomb aimer begins the countdown, voice tight. 5, 4, 3. The bomber is already banking away, engines screaming as tracer fire follows them across the lake. Searchlights claw at their fuselage, but Gibson ignores them, pulling the aircraft low across the tree line. 2, 1 detonation. The lake erupts. A column of water surges skyward, hundreds of feet high, lit from beneath by the fireball blooming deep underwater. The explosion doesn't look like typical ordnance. It resembles a volcanic upheaval, a massive eruption forced upward through the entire weight of the reservoir. "Did we get it?" one of the crew shouts. No one can see, they're too busy escaping the gauntlet of fire. Behind them, the shockwave slams into the valley walls, echoing like rolling thunder. A plume of mist drifts across the lake. The dam is hidden behind steam and debris. Gibson circles wide, calling on another Lancaster to begin their run. "AJM, you're next, same approach, keep it steady." The second bomber dives toward the lake. German gunners, now fully awake, pour fire across the water, filling the air with red streaks. AJM claws through it, engines flaring, the pilot forcing the aircraft to stay low, so low the crew can see individual ripples on the lake's surface. Their bomb drops. Another set of leaps, 1, 2, 3, then another underwater detonation shakes the valley. Still the dam holds. Gibson's voice comes through the radio, calm but urgent. "Next aircraft, keep going, she's taking damage." The third attack begins. This time, the German defenses are ready. A cluster of flak bursts directly ahead. Shrapnel smashes through the bomber's fuselage. The left engine coughs fire. The crew has seconds to release the bomb before the aircraft becomes unflyable. "Hold her steady, just a few more seconds." The bomb releases. The Lancaster claws upward, trying to gain altitude, but one wing drops sharply. Flames trail behind it. With heartbreaking inevitability, the bomber rolls, plunging into the far side of the valley with a flash that illuminates the dam face. Silence follows for a moment. Even the German guns hesitate. Gibson exhales, "We carry on. Next aircraft, make your run." AJJ swoops in. Tracer fire traces lines across the water. The bomb aimer calls height corrections. Up, down, hold, hold. The bomb drops, skip, strike, sinks. A final underwater explosion hammers the dam. And this time the stone wall cracks. It begins as a thin, dark line at the center, just visible in the moonlight. Then the crack widens, spreading like a fracture in glass. Chunks of masonry tear free. The lake behind the dam bulges, forced forward by millions of tons of pressure. Then, with a roar that drowns out the guns, the dam gives way. A tidal wall of water, more than 300 million tons, erupts through the breach. It surges into the valley below, sweeping away trees, buildings, bridges, and entire hamlets. The flood races downriver like a moving mountain, unstoppable and deafening. "Good God," someone whispers inside Gibson's aircraft. But they cannot stay. This is only the first target. Gibson switches channels. "All aircraft, the Möhne is breached, form up on me, we move to the next dam." Below them, the Ruhr Valley disappears under a rising sea of white water. The mission is far from over. The night sky over the Ruhr shimmers faintly with mist kicked up from the shattered Möhne reservoir. Gibson's Lancaster banks south, away from the thunder of collapsing masonry, and the remaining aircraft fall in behind him, dark silhouettes gliding over a landscape now drowning under a surge of unstoppable water. In the distance, fires flicker where power stations and villages have already been swept away. German emergency signals crackle across the radio bands, though the British crews can't understand the words. What they can hear is the urgency, the panic, and it tells them everything they need to know. The next target lies deeper in the hills, the Eder Dam. Unlike the Möhne, it has no torpedo nets and only light defenses, but it's protected by something far more dangerous: geography. The Eder Valley is a twisting labyrinth of ridges, forests, and narrow passes. To reach the dam, the Lancasters must weave between high hills, drop suddenly into the valley basin, and line up perfectly on a narrow stretch of water bordered by steep slopes. It's a pilot's nightmare, especially in the dark. Gibson radios ahead. AJE and AJZ, you are to make the first approaches. Watch the ridge lines, they come up fast. Off his starboard wing, FLT-LT Mickey Martin in AJP flashes his recognition lights briefly. Martin trained for weeks skimming tree lines and practicing impossible approaches. He leans forward in his seat now, face calm, hands steady on the controls. Beside him, his navigator traces the valley contours under a dim lamp. They cross over a ridgeline, and the valley drops away beneath them like an open mouth. The Edersee Reservoir lies below, still and glassy, framed by dense woodland. In the middle of this quiet bowl of water, the Eder Dam stretches across the valley floor like a massive knife edge of stone. Far below, a single German outpost sits half asleep. There are no searchlights sweeping the sky, no coordinated flak bursts, only a few startled soldiers scrambling at the first distant rumble of engines. But the danger tonight isn't man-made. Martin dives into the valley, the Lancaster shuddering as it slips between two steep slopes. The bomb aimer calls corrections left, right, down, trying to line up the aircraft with a narrow corridor barely wide enough for their wingspan. Too high, the bomb aimer warns. Martin pulls back, circling again. Gibson watches from above, circling at a safe height. He knows this approach is difficult. He tried it himself during daylight reconnaissance in a smaller aircraft. Doing it in a Lancaster at night is an act of borderline insanity. AJZ attempts the run next. The bomber swoops into the valley, engines roaring as the pilot forces the heavy aircraft downward toward the still water. But again, the angle is wrong. The aircraft overshoots, pulling up just in time to avoid slamming into a forested slope. Take her around, Gibson orders. Get a clean run. The crews circle again, burning precious fuel, but there's no rushing this. A bad approach means a missed bomb, and a missed bomb means a wasted life, a wasted chance. Martin tries again. This time he descends deeper, lower, until the trees whip past the cockpit windows. The aircraft levels out just feet above the water. The bomb aimer engages the spotlight system. Two white beams shine down. They're supposed to meet at a single point on the water when the bomber is at perfect height. They don't meet. Up just a touch, hold it there. The dam looms ahead, that slab of stone filling the nose of the bomber. Stand by, stand by. The bomb drops. The backward spinning cylinder leaps across the Edersee, one skip, two, three, and slams into the dam face before sinking. Moments later, a column of water erupts. The explosion booms through the valley, bouncing between the hills, but when the spray clears, the dam still stands. Gibson's voice, good run, another pass. AJZ lines up again. This run is smoother, cleaner. The pilot adjusts altitude by inches, refusing to let the aircraft drift even slightly off-center. When the bomb drops, its skips are perfectly aligned, clean arcs across black water. It explodes, and the Eder Dam breaks. A vast curtain of water bursts forward, tearing out the central span. The breach widens immediately, and the reservoir pours through the opening with unstoppable force. Trees snap, earth shakes, and the roar drowns out even the Merlin engines overhead. From the cockpit of AJP, Martin exhales, voice faint with relief. She's gone, good God, she's gone. Gibson acknowledges, already turning his attention toward the last objective, the Sorpe, the most difficult dam of them all. The night is far from over, and the cost is rising. The valley behind the Eder is drowning in darkness and rushing water as Gibson banks his Lancaster toward the east. Below them, the ruptured dam vomits its reservoir into the countryside, but the crew barely has time to register the devastation. They still have one more giant to face, and this one will not fall easily. The Sorpe Dam is different. While the Möhne and Eder are curved concrete giants, the Sorpe is an earth-filled colossus, thick sloping, reinforced with layers of packed soil and concrete. Torpedo nets don't matter here. Geometry is the enemy. A skipping bomb won't strike the vertical wall because there is no wall. Instead, the attackers must fly the length of the dam, dropping their bomb along the crown in a manner no one has fully rehearsed. Complicating it all, fog clings to the valley like a living thing. As the Lancasters approach, the landscape becomes a blur. rooftops vanish, tree lines dissolve, and the sky bleeds into the ground in one continuous sheet of gray. Gibson descends cautiously, straining to keep the horizon in view. He radios the only aircraft assigned to the Sorpe tonight, AJT, flown by FLT-LT Joe McCarthy. "Joe, how's your visibility?" A crackle, then McCarthy's confident voice, "Rotten, but we'll manage." AJT pushes lower, the bomber nearly brushing the fog. Inside, the bomb aimer adjusts his controls with tense precision. The Sorpe reservoir emerges faintly through the haze, stretching silently beneath the aircraft like a dark mirror. The dam itself is barely visible until they're almost on top of it. A long, thick ridge cutting through the fog, its crest wide enough that the pilots could almost imagine landing on it if they dared. McCarthy lines up his approach. "This'll be a tight one," the navigator mutters. The flight engineer replies, "Aren't they all tonight?" McCarthy descends further, the trees on either side rising like walls. The Sorpe Valley is narrow, far narrower than the Möhne or Eder approaches. And unlike those, this drop must be made along the dam's length with only feet to spare on each wingtip. "Coming left, steady," the bomb aimer calls. The Lancaster wobbles in the crosswind. "Not good enough, taking her around," McCarthy decides. He pulls up sharply, too sharply for comfort. The bomber groans under the stress, engines throttling hard as it claws its way back into the fog. Gibson circles overhead, watching the attempt with growing respect. "Take your time, Joe, line her up properly." AJT descends again. This time the approach is better, smoother, more centered. The spotlights flicker through the fog, struggling to cast a clear point on the wet roadway of the dam's crest. "Height good, hold her, holds." McCarthy corrects, nudging the control column millimeter by millimeter. The dam passes beneath them, broad and flat, flanked by steep banks. "Bomb away." The spinning cylinder drops and strikes the dam's crest with a violent thud, bouncing once before rolling off the far side and detonating below the surface of the reservoir. A muffled, shuddering explosion rolls across the valley, but when the mist clears, the Sorpe still stands. "Damn it," someone mutters. McCarthy grits his teeth. "We go again." And he does. A second approach, too high. A third off-center. A fourth aborted due to crosswind. 5, 6, 7 attempts. Each pass drains fuel, burns minutes, and presses every man aboard closer to the edge of exhaustion. The fog only thickens, as if the valley is determined to swallow the bomber whole. On the 8th attempt, McCarthy forces himself into an almost reckless descent. The Lancaster tears along the length of the dam, engines screaming under the strain. "Hold it, hold it." The bomb falls. A second explosion shakes the Sorpe, larger than the first. Soil cascades down the inner slope, ripples flash across the reservoir. But again the dam holds. Its earthen core absorbs the blasts, bruised but unbroken. McCarthy pulls AJT away, breathing hard. "That's all we can do, we're out of time." Gibson acknowledges, his voice heavy. The Sorpe will survive the night, but damaged, its spine weakened, its defensive staff shaken. It may yet become a liability for Germany, but it will not break as the others did. The surviving Lancasters begin turning for home. But their gauntlet is not behind them yet. The fog over the Sorpe drifts behind the Lancasters as they claw their way back into the open night. The engines thrum like aching muscles, steady, exhausted, but still carrying the crews toward home. They have been flying for hours. Adrenaline is thinning. Fatigue settles deep into every joint, every breath inside the narrow fuselages. Below them, Germany is awake. Columns of emergency vehicles race along the valley roads. Sirens echo up through the hills, thin, frantic, distant. Towns that were dark and silent earlier now flicker with scattered lights as civilians stumble into streets, unaware of the full catastrophe unfolding beyond their view. The crews don't look back, they can't. Gibson leads the survivors toward the west, skimming over treetops and rooftops just as they had on the inbound journey, but now the danger feels doubled. Fuel gauges sink lower, engines cough occasionally from earlier strain, and Germany, now alerted, has become a hornet's nest. Searchlights sweep wider arcs. Flak bursts appear more frequently, their sharp flashes blooming across the sky like malignant stars. One burst detonates ahead of Gibson's Lancaster, forcing him into a sudden bank that rattles every rib of the aircraft. "Easy, easy, watch the trees," the navigator warns. A few hundred feet below, branches whip past in shadowy streaks. Gibson steadies the bomber, leveling off at a perilously low altitude. Far behind him, another Lancaster strays too close to a pocket of flak that erupts from a hillside battery. The shells trace a perfect line toward the aircraft. One finds its mark. A fireball blooms briefly in the night, then fades, leaving only smoke drifting across the valley. The intercom on Gibson's aircraft goes quiet. Everyone knows what that means. No one says it aloud. The remaining crews push on. They reach the Rhine again, its silver ribbon gleaming. The border of Holland lies just beyond. Freedom, in theory. But the Germans defend the river crossings with bitter persistence. Tracer fire arcs upward from the banks, streaking past the Lancasters so closely that the gunners instinctively flinch back in their turrets. A burst from below rakes one bomber's underside. Metal shrieks. A chunk of fuselage tears away, spinning into the darkness. The pilot holds the aircraft steady, though fuel now pours from a ragged wound along one wing. "We're losing pressure," the engineer reports. "We won't make Scampton at this rate." "Divert to the first friendly field you spot," Gibson instructs. "Get her on the ground any way you can." The damaged bomber veers off, dropping lower still. Gibson watches it for as long as he can, then forces himself to look forward again. They cross the Dutch coastline just above sea level, and the moment the bombers arc out over the open water, every man feels a subtle shift, a release. They are still far from home, but the worst is behind them now. The North Sea yawns wide and dark. The moon glints along the wave crests. Gibson reduces his altitude, settling into the same sea-skimming profile they used at the mission's start. It is quieter now. No flak, no searchlights, no sudden hills to dodge. Only the steady, rhythmic roar of the Merlins. For the first time in hours, some of the crew allow their shoulders to relax. As dawn begins to creep across the horizon behind them, the coastline of England emerges, a faint gray promise etched against the morning sky. Gibson calls in their approach to home base. The radio operator listens to the reply, then gives a small nod. They're expected. One by one, the Lancasters cross into British airspace. A few lights flicker across the countryside as early risers begin their day, unaware that history is passing just above them. Finally, Gibson lines up for landing. The wheels touch down with a gentle squeal. The Lancaster rolls along the runway, engines winding down from hours of relentless strain. As they taxi in, ground crews wave them toward their dispersal point. Gibson finally removes his oxygen mask. His face is drawn tired, but his eyes carry the sharp alertness of someone who has flown at the edge of death and returned. When the crew drops from the hatch, the cool morning air hits them like a blessing. Other aircraft begin arriving. Some land hard, struggling with damage. Some come in on one engine. A few do not return at all. When the tally is complete, the price becomes clear. Many brave men did not see English soil again. But the dams are gone. The Ruhr Valley is flooding. German industry is staggering. And a weapon once thought impossible, a spinning cylinder designed by a soft-spoken engineer, has changed the course of a single night in the war. The surviving crews gather silently, swapping exhausted nods, claps on shoulders, or simply sitting on the grass with helmets still in hand. No cheering, no fist pumping, just the quiet understanding that they did something extraordinary and paid dearly to do it. Above them, the sun rises over RAF Scampton, and the story of the Dambusters becomes legend.